Have you ever wondered what kind of punishment people convicted of heresy faced during a dark period in history, where their fate was decided in front of thousands of onlookers? On the 24th of September, 1559, in Seville, Spain, the Plaza de San Francisco was packed. Thousands of people from all over had gathered for 3 days to witness the gruesome spectacle of an auto da fe. In the middle of the square, 2 massive wooden platforms were erected. On one platform were judges, priests, and officials, the people who held power. On the other platform, the condemned stood waiting, fear etched on their faces. They were the ones accused of committing the most heinous crime in Spanish society at the time: heresy. Would a 26-year-old girl, the daughter of a noble family, dare to challenge the brutal power of the Inquisition and risk her life for her beliefs? María de Bohórquez, only 26 years old, was the daughter of one of the most noble families in Seville. She was accused of the greatest crime in the eyes of the authorities at that time: reading the Bible in Castilian and following the ideas of Martin Luther. In contrast to the obvious fear of the other convicts, Maria maintained a strange calm, not wavering. Her eyes contained no fear, but only reflected the fierce faith of someone ready to face death for her ideals. When facing the court of the Holy Office, she not only showed confidence, but also defended her views with sharp eloquence and theological knowledge that left the veteran judges bewildered. The words to persuade her to renounce her faith, the horrifying tortures, the promises of leniency, all in vain. Maria was steadfast in her resolve. She was not only a martyr, but also an unyielding symbol of resistance to the rigid views of the Spanish Inquisition, which imposed its power on every thought. The big question is, how could a young girl from a noble family dare to challenge the powerful ruling forces of the time, knowing that the price might be death? Her steadfastness, despite the tragic fate that awaited her, has become a deep imprint on history, leaving a deep haunting that is not easily erased. To truly understand Maria's intellectual courage and unwavering faith, we must go back to her early life, which was short but remarkable. Maria was born in 1533 in Seville, the illegitimate daughter of Pedro Garcia de Jerez Borges, a member of the city's lower nobility. She grew up in a privileged environment, receiving a better education than any other woman of her time. From an early age, Maria displayed a keen intellect and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Unlike most young girls, who were taught only household skills, social etiquette, and simple religious lessons, Maria received a comprehensive classical education. She excelled in Latin, studied Greek, and more importantly, was able to read and understand the original texts of the Bible. Contemporary accounts describe Maria as a young woman who was able to memorize most of the New Testament, in particular, passages dealing with controversial theological topics such as justification by faith, the role of works, the sacraments, and the nature of the true church. In the early 16th century, Seville was a vibrant city, thriving on trade with the Americas, a cultural center where new ideas spread despite the stranglehold of the Inquisition. In this context, Maria was exposed to the reformist theories that were changing Europe. The Reformation was beginning to creep into Spain through merchants, diplomats, and students returning from other countries. Banned books were smuggled in, often hidden in wine barrels or the bottoms of chests. Julianilo Hernandez, a mule driver, became famous for bringing Protestant works to Seville from Burgundy. However, the most important encounter in Maria's intellectual formation was the influence of Dr. Juan Gil, also known as Egidio, and Casiodoro de Reina, a monk from the monastery of San Isidoro del Campo. Both were influenced by the Reformation, spreading new ideas that, although disguised in acceptable language to avoid accusations of heresy, contained the core of Luther's teachings: salvation through faith, the supremacy of the Bible, and challenges to some Catholic dogmas. These ideas found fertile ground in Maria's curious mind. Maria was particularly attracted to the Protestant idea that every Christian should have direct access to the Bible in his own language without the mediation of the clergy. This view directly challenged the authority of the Catholic Church to interpret the Bible at that time. The house of Isabel de Bana, a Seville noblewoman, became a meeting point for the new Protestant movement in the city. There, meetings were held to study and debate sacred texts in direct violation of the norms of the Church. Maria was a regular at these gatherings, distinguishing herself with her profound intellect and powerful rhetoric in defending reformist ideas. What began as an intellectual interest soon became a strong religious conviction. Maria not only learned about reformist ideas, but immersed herself in them to the point of becoming one of their most ardent defenders. Consciously or unconsciously, she had crossed a dangerous line, in quote. For someone like Maria, the political landscape of Spain under Philip II could not have been more hostile. The king, who ruled an empire that spanned Europe and the New World, proclaimed himself the staunch defender of Catholicism against the spread of Protestant heresy. Religious unity was seen as essential to the stability of the empire. To maintain that unity, the Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478 by the Catholic monarchs, became an extremely powerful tool, serving both religious and political purposes. So powerful that it became a royal arm. In the 1550s, the Inquisition grew in power in Seville, especially after reports of Lutheran groups in the city. Investigations revealed that the monastery of San Isidoro del Campo was one of the gathering places of these heretics. In 1557, many of the monks, including Cassiodoro de Reina, fled to Geneva, sensing the terrible threat that lay ahead. But others were not spared. The grip on the Protestants in Seville tightened, and by 1558 the Inquisition had gathered enough evidence to launch a manhunt. When Isabel de Bena's house was discovered to be a gathering place for Protestants, not only were the residents arrested, but the house was completely razed. All the books and documents in it were confiscated and burned. In the midst of the frenzy, María de Bohórquez, now about 25 years old, was also arrested for her Lutheranism. Why did Maria's death become a symbol of steadfastness? When brought before the court for questioning, María de Bohórquez demonstrated extraordinary mental and intellectual strength, which surprised even experienced judges. The investigation process was strictly structured, where the accused were never fully informed of the charges against them, nor were they told the identity of their accusers. In fact, they were forced to confess their guilt with the promise of leniency. Those who refused or gave incomplete confessions could face torture. Maria initially insisted that she was a fully Catholic and Orthodox, and that her views should not be condemned but held up as an exemplary model. When confronted with the charges against her, she accepted some of them, but rejected others, claiming they were false or misunderstood. However, Maria's defense was not enough to convince the judges of her innocence. Records from the period indicate that the most striking feature of her record was her ability to debate theology. Although not yet a doctor of theology, Maria demonstrated a capacity for persuasive and passionate debate that silenced even the most steadfast judges for a time. One of the interrogation clerks noted that Maria possessed an extraordinary intellect, but this only reinforced their belief that she was a stubborn heretic who not only believed in heretical doctrines, but actively propagated them. This made Maria a serious threat and deserving of the maximum punishment. Throughout her imprisonment, priests were sent to persuade Maria to renounce her heretical beliefs. However, all failed in the face of her unwavering determination. Records from the period also note that the judges were unable to force Maria to sign an affidavit of guilt, despite all the means and pressure they had used. Finally, on the 24th of September, 1559, Maria and the other condemned were brought to the Plaza de San Francisco, where a haunting scene was staged. The execution was not only a punitive measure, but also a public warning to the people. The condemned, dressed in yellow with a red cross, had to listen to a long sermon about their sins before the sentences were read. For those who were repentant, the punishment could be lighter, but for those as stubborn as Maria, there was only one sentence: death by fire. Before she suffered death, she was given one last chance to renounce her faith, which would have saved her from the painful death by fire, and instead ended in death by strangulation. However, Maria refused. As she was tied to the stake, Maria remained unshaken in her calm demeanor, continuing to profess her faith her own. She even counseled a dying friend who showed signs of abandoning her faith at the last minute. As the flames began to consume her body, witnesses said that Maria continued to pray, her eyes looking up to the sky as a final farewell. Minutes later, amid the smoke and flames, her voice was silenced forever, ending a life that had dared to challenge the religious authority of the time. A soul torn between the blades of blind faith, and the price was not only life. In Hora de Fe, where the bloody deaths of innocent victims still echo, many women accused of being Lutheran faced a brutal death sentence. Isabel de Baena, Maria Coronel, Maria de Viruez, and Francisca Lopez are unforgettable names among them. Isabel's house was not only confiscated but completely destroyed, a barbaric act applied by the authorities to places considered polluted by heresy. The story of María de Bohórquez, although it may have been buried in the darkness of time, her extraordinary courage and tragic death have become an indelible symbol through the centuries. In 1799, the Spanish writer Luis Gutiérrez published a novel titled Cornelia Borroquia, Historia Verdadera de la Judía Española, inspired by Maria's story and some details from Maria Coronel's life. This book not only denounced the cruelty of the Inquisition, but also ignited the movement for freedom and against religious oppression in the 19th century. The execution of María de Bohórquez not only took the life of a woman, but also wiped out the seeds of reform in Spain, leaving a great void in the religious and intellectual movement of that era. Those who were lucky enough to survive fled, carrying their knowledge and ideals with them, continuing the struggle in other countries. Casiodoro de Reina, a close friend and spiritual advisor of Maria, completed the first translation of the Bible into Castilian in 1569, known as the Bible of the Bear. This translation is still used by Spanish-speaking Protestant communities today. María de Bohórquez, in her act of self-sacrifice, left a powerful message about freedom of thought, about the value of defending one's beliefs against the pressures and attacks of power. Maria's story is not only a lesson in courage and intelligence. In an age when women were often excluded from philosophical and theological debates, she was a woman who not only dared to believe in what she believed, but defended it with an intellectual sharpness that surprised even the most violent. After nearly 500 years, the city of Seville honored Maria by naming a street in her memory. Although it was a belated gesture, for those who understood the value of courage, it was a worthy recognition of a woman who, as one contemporary put it, demonstrated that nobility lies not in blood, but in the ability to hold on to one's beliefs until the last breath. The death of a noble woman, the massacre of a tribe over a banned book, remains a living testament that even in the darkest hours of intolerance, there are always those willing to defend the basic human right to freedom of thought, even at the cost of their lives.